Hello and welcome to my recreation of the Great European Struggle, or colloquially referred in England as the Anglo-Germanic War. It is important to note, though, before we get into the main war, what was going on before the war. The story starts in America, which was facing a tense re-election when FDR was only barely able to scrape by with a 60% popular vote. This was due to the lackluster New Deal which he tried to implement. This saw the U.S. stay in epic turmoil, staying in depression. Another issue was that the public found out about FDR's battle with polio, which painted him as a weak leader in a time in which America needed strong leaders. In order to garner support, FDR would pass the Neutrality Declaration, which called for the United States to stay totally neutral in all foreign affairs, and this declaration could only be broken by a supermajority in Congress, which would mean a 75% vote to pass. While over in Europe, fascist dictatorships took over in countries like Germany and Italy, while in Asia, Japan was on a warpath when they instigated the Second Sino-Japanese War. As a storm brewed over Central Europe, Western Europe, France and Britain acted as beacons of democracy. The question on everyone's mind was, how strong would those beacons be? Both England and France were continent-spanning empires, with England even controlling 5 colonies: New Zealand, Australia, India, South Africa, and Canada, while France controlled West Africa. This question on how strong the democracies in the West was tested when the Germans had reoccupied the Rhineland, which was only possible due to Hitler's secret rearmament of the German industry and military. The response from the West was a resounding indifference from Britain and France. Knowing that the West would not react to German aggression, Hitler would later Anschluss Austria, which saw the integration of Austria into Germany. This was passed via a dubious referendum. This was strictly against the terms of the Versailles Treaty, which forbade Austria and Germany from ever uniting. However, this was the final time the Treaty of Versailles was ever considered seriously by the Germans, leading to it being practically thrown out the window. The Nazi regime would eventually meet with the British and French over concerns of German aggression. At the end of the talks, the British Prime Minister at the time would declare peace in our time. This was signaled by the signing off of the Munich Agreement, which allowed for Germany to invade the Sudetenland and end any further German annexations. This move had blindsided the Czech government when the German troops would march into Sudetenland and occupy it. This peace was only kept for less than a year, as Germany would invade Czechoslovakia a year later, unopposed. Hope for peace would be ended when Germany would invade Poland, triggering the UK and France to go in total war with Germany. The Germans would strike fast in Poland using the blitzkrieg style of invasion, which ended up with a Polish surrender in a matter of weeks, ending the German-Polish War, as the Polish government fled into exile to Britain. After the quick invasion of Poland, Germany would set its sights on Denmark and Norway. This would mark a turning point in the war during the Battle of Copenhagen, in which the Allies would decisively lose, resulting in the direct capture of the British Navy. This was due to the fact that England was supplying both Poland and Denmark with armed goods that needed a naval escort. Therefore, once Copenhagen fell to the Germans, the British Navy was trapped and subsequently cut off from the Atlantic, due to the straits being blocked off by German soldiers, leading to the capture of the English surface fleet. 9 British battleships were captured, with the most crucial of those capital ships being the HMS Hood, now being under German control. This single event saw Britain lose its naval supremacy in the Atlantic, as all that remained as part of the European fleet was 3 battleships and a few destroyers. After the Germans defeated the Danish, they would soon invade Norway. After the invasion, they would initiate the Schlieffen Plan, which was the invasion of Belgium, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg. This was in order to bypass the French's Maginot Line, which was an impenetrable line of forts along the Alsace-Lorraine region. Once underway, the Germans would bypass both the dense forest of the Argonne and the Ardennes and blitzed their way through northern France and the Benelux. This would catch the BEF by surprise, as it became encircled around the port of Dunkirk. With over 300,000 troops stuck, the British Navy had estimated there would only be a rescue of 10,000 soldiers. But after a heroic attempt, over 20,000 soldiers were able to escape, making this a huge British victory. However, with the capture of Paris, the French government would formally surrender. This meant that Germany would control all of northern France, while southern France would be controlled by the Vichy French government. There, however, was a few people in the French high command, like Charles de Gaulle, that would form the new nation of Free France, located in southwest Africa, in order to keep up the fight against the Germans in hopes of liberating France. With the surrender of France, the English sought to wipe out the Vichy French navy. At the Battle of Mers el Kebir, the battle resulted in much of the Vichy French navy being wiped out. However, now with an open aggression from the English, the Vichy French government would openly declare war on England, as they saw the battle as a direct assault upon Vichy French sovereignty, leading to them joining the Axis with it. Now with the war underway, the English low on allies, besides their colonies and the Free French government, Britain would reach out to America, but due to the ineffective New Deal, the US was still under the Neutrality Declaration. Now standing alone in Europe, England had to fight three fronts. One of the fronts was the Battle of Atlantic. This was the dance between British convoys and the German submarine wolf packs. In almost every instance where German submarines caught up with British convoys, the British convoys were sunk. This led to massive food shortages and other shortages of necessary war materials like tungsten. In response, Britain would increase the amount of shipments from India and Canada in order to supply their war effort. This had the knock-on effect of causing mass starvation in India, diverted to England, while Canada was able to stay afloat with food shipments from America. As the English merchant fleet was under attack, the Mediterranean front would open up, as the Germans and Italians would advance into Egypt. With the lack of support from England due to the blockade, the German tank corps was able to advance quickly through Egypt. This was due to command under Erwin Rommel when he smashed through the English defense at El Alamein. The British would see the vital loss of the Suez Canal and Cairo. However, due to the brave Anzac troops sent into the Sahara, the British were able to halt the Italian advance into Sudan. Of the 50,000 Anzac troops sent to sabotage Italian supplies, only 7,000 brave soldiers were able to make it back. With the Italian success in Cairo, this would embolden the Spanish to align themselves with the Germans. This would result in the capture of the Strait of Gibraltar, isolating the British from any naval actions. In response, the English would call upon the Portuguese by citing the Treaty of Windsor. The new Spanish-Portuguese front would see limited success, as the Portuguese and South African troops would be able to capture and hold Galicia. After this initial success, the front would remain stagnant for most of the war. The third front would be the Battle of England. A dark storm over England had been brewing ever since the fall of France. Lightning would finally strike as the Germans would start the Blitz over England. The gallant RAF would, however, try and meet the match, but due to shortages of resources, fuel, and food, the RAF would not be able to launch many planes to oppose the Germans' attacks. This would result in the total destruction of any and all British air bases, crippling the RAF's fighting ability. While on the civilian front, many would seek protection underground, as valiant British anti-air forces were able to shoot down many of the treacherous German bombers. By defeat after defeat, Winston Churchill would give his finest hour speech to the battered people of England. He promised the world that England would fight tooth and nail to the end if it meant beating the Germans and saving democracy. In this speech, he would state that England was facing their darkest hour against a German menace, in which the English will stand up to any and all invasion from England to the Commonwealth. However, this soon became a reality, as on one cold January day in 1941, the Germans would launch Operation Sea Lion, the largest naval invasion in history. The first stage of the invasion would start with a full bombardment of the English coast by the German Navy. Then this was followed by the attack by the Fallschirmjäger that landed on the hills of southern England behind enemy lines. By early morning, the army would roll up to an ill-prepared English coast guard and quickly capture the hills of Dover. Immediately after the surprise invasion, the Germans were able to sweep through the countryside, wiping out any local crack divisions. The German advance would be stopped, however, at the outskirts of London, as Churchill was finally able to send down the British Reserve Army. This was the start of the Battle of London, the most devastating battle in all of the Great European struggle. German troops flooded into London. Bloody urban combat would ensue. Controversially, Winston Churchill, on his own accord, would enact the now infamous People's Storm Battalions. These divisions were made up of everyday Londoners from any age and physical group. These militia units' main purpose was to slow down the German advance, as in every combat situation they would be outgunned and outmanned and outskilled by the German soldiers. Another notable decision made by Winston Churchill during the German assault was the poisoning of the Thames. This was done in order to cut the German supply line, as many German soldiers relied off the river for water. This had the side effect of also poisoning the water supply of London. At the end of the Battle of London, 97% of the city would be destroyed, with over two-thirds of the population killed, 5.33 million. For the British military, they lost 750,000 servicemen, while the Commonwealth would lose 250,000 during the battle, while the Germans would only see 400,000 soldiers killed before the retreat to Dover. Some notable figures would also die during the Battle of London, with King George dying during the charge at the Battle of Trafalgar Square. Famous writer George Orwell would perish during the Battle of the London Sewer System, and General Montgomery falling during the Siege of Windsor Castle. Finally, the Germans would retreat out of Britain due to the losses at the Battle of London. The British people would enter a state of paranoia, as many fear a new invasion will come at any moment. This would result in rampant military buildup, as this would take a heavy toll on England as it started to militarize, and also India as more food was diverted to England. Over across the pond, the U.S. would partially leave isolation when Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, but due to a lackluster New Deal plan, the U.S. would see many setbacks at the start of the war. However, after the Battle of Okinawa in 1946, the U.S. was able to launch Operation Downfall, putting out the rising sun, by early 1948. Seeing the Americans fight the Japanese, the English would reach out one more time, but the U.S. would refuse to break its neutrality due to a dividing Congress, as any bill to remove the neutrality declaration was shot down, as it needed a supermajority due to many Republican senators not wanting the U.S. to be involved outside of the Japanese War. However, by spring 1943, England would get a new ally in the ill-prepared Soviet Union when Germany invaded with Operation Barbarossa. Any dream for this ally to crush the Germans would be broken, as the Soviets had not considered a German invasion as a possibility due to a non-aggression pact and the German losses at the Battle of London. But due to supplementary Vichy French troops, the Germans were able to quickly sweep through Russia, capturing Stalingrad, Leningrad, and Moscow. Only in early 1946 would the USSR be able to hold off the German invasion at the Ural Mountains. Only in 1949 would England finally surrender to Germany. In the years after the Battle of London, the English would have only found one victory in the Battle of Navarre, which saw the complete defeat of Spain. Being stuck at the Pyrenees Mountains, the English saw no way of possibly succeeding in an invasion of France. With the Treaty of Andorra, Germany would now span from Paris to the Ural Mountains, while Italy would reach in Africa from Libya to Ethiopia. For England, not only did the map change, but so did the psyche of the everyday British man. As in 1950, under Winston Churchill, the British population would vote to be put under a surveillance state. This was in fear of another Battle of London. led to England holding its colonies with an iron grip. However, in modern times, much of the British effort has been put into putting down the civil war against the colonial government of India. While the USSR, under an aging Stalin, has continued to fight the patriotic war against Germany in an attempt to save their civilization. In the current year of 1950, the world is divided between the American sphere, which is China, Japan, and Mexico, the British sphere, colonial India, Oceania, Canada, and Hispania, the German Reich Pack, Italy, Vichy France, and various Reich Commissariats, and the Soviet resistance.